Hi folks, welcome back. It's been a while since I've made one of these. I've been kind of busy, so I'm finally getting back to it. But if we think back to the previous video that I made a while ago, I discussed mutations, and I explained how the ability of DNA to encode for proteins that both recognize and repair damage and errors is essential to maintaining life. And as I already explained, the process or the proteins that handle these functions do a very good job. They are diligent, thorough, effective, and efficient. And as a result of that, the mutation rate is very low. Mutations, both large and small, do happen, but the fact is they're rare events. And this is not negotiable or arguable. Mutation rates are low. Even the evolutionists are forced to admit this fact because it's been observed. And yet, this fact is another critical piece of information in the fallacy of evolution, because this is an enormous, insurmountable problem for evolution. Yet, as with all the other data, the evolutionists choose to ignore the truth. So, let me explain this. A typical evolutionary response to the problem of low mutation rates can be summed up in the statement from the American Phytopathological Society website, which says, and I quote, "The ultimate source of all genetic variation is mutation. Mutation is important as the first step of evolution because it creates a new DNA sequence for a particular gene, creating a new allele. Mutation, acting as an evolutionary force by itself, has the potential to cause significant changes in allele frequencies over very long periods of time. But if mutation were the only force acting on pathogen populations, then evolution would occur at a rate that we could not observe." The power of time. Or is it, the power of cheese? Well, it might as well be cheese, because cheese will work about as well as time in this evolutionary dilemma. And by the way, as I progress through these videos, I'll in the future get to discussing the issue of time and all the lies that are involved in this topic. Now, even though the evolutionists admit the mutation rate is too low to account for evolution, they still assume it did. They believe evolution happens through incremental changes in the DNA, through the gradual accumulation of mutations. But they also admit evolution could not occur at the observable mutation rate. So, would you agree that this is a serious problem? Folks, this is called denial, and you could also call it insanity. You must understand that mutations are the basis of evolution. You must get this. To create new species, you must have new genetic information. And to get that new genetic information, it must come from within the DNA. And to do that, there must be gradual changes in the DNA, a gradual accumulation of mutations. So mutations are the voodoo of evolution. However, the damning fact is that the mutation rate is not even in the same ballpark as that which would be necessary for evolution. Not only that, the evolutionists are the ones who commonly calculate these mutation rates. They just keep shooting themselves in the foot. On the American Phytopathological Society website, They also provide a simple model for calculating mutation rates, from which I'll spare you. But after their calculations, they state, and I quote, "This simple model should convince you that mutation is a very weak force when it comes to changing allele frequencies." However, in the very next sentence, they state, and I quote, "But mutation is very important for introducing new alleles, new DNA sequences, into populations." So here's a great summary of the belief of the evolutionist. The mutation rate is too low to account for evolution. Yes, we admit it. However, the mutation rate must be high enough to account for evolution. Say what? Did they just say what I think they said? Yes, they did. And they say it all the time. And these people are supposed to be intelligent? Dr. John W. Kimball, biology teacher and author of the General Biology textbook, as well as other widely used books on cell biology and immunology, also has a website called Kimball's Biology Pages. And from Kimball's website, we read the following, and I quote, "Mutations are rare events. This is surprising." Really? Why is that? Because he and all the other evolutionists know the mutation rate is too low to account for evolution. It's surprising to them because it destroys the foundation of their theory. Yet they still choose to stick to it. They still propagate their fairy tale. And my last name is Grimm, so I know fairy tales. What's sad is that even rats know when to get off a sinking ship. This is what's happening in science classes all over the world. Science teachers and their textbooks that they use continue to propagate this nonsense as if it were truth, even though the data say otherwise. The Introduction to Human Genetics course taught at the University College London teaches about mutations, and I quote, "Mutation is the alteration of DNA sequence, whether it be in a small way by the alteration of a single base pair, or whether it be a gross event such as the gain or loss of an entire chromosome. It may be caused through the action of damaging chemicals or radiation, or through the errors inherent in the DNA replication and repair reactions. In the long term, it is essential to our existence. Without mutation, there could be no change, and without change, life cannot evolve. If it had not been for mutation, the world would still be covered in primeval slime." But the lunacy continues. The course goes on to teach, and I quote, "A single base pair change may have no genetic consequences whatsoever, but, on the other hand, it may cause a dominant lethal effect. The first alternative is far more likely. Why? Because 95% of DNA is non-coding, and a single base change occurring within it is unlikely to have any effect. In addition, because of the degeneracy of the genetic code, many mutations occurring within the third base position in a codon will have no consequence to the amino acid uncoded." Again, we find supposedly educated, intelligent people acting ignorantly. Did you catch what was taught in this course? Not only is the mutation rate, the rate, too low for evolution, but the types of mutations that occur, that which has been observed, drop the rate even lower. As they correctly stated, most mutations do not even have a genetic consequence. As Dr. Kimball points out, and I quote, "Should we be worried about such spontaneous mutation rates? Probably not. Most, as much as 97% of our DNA does not encode anything. With our high proportion of junk DNA, many mutations will occur in regions that will have no effect on our phenotype. For example, mutations in so-called junk DNA, which do not affect organism function, tend to accumulate at a faster rate than mutations in DNA that is actively in use in the organism. The evolutionists are making this too easy for me and for you, but I love it when they set me up like this. To account for evolution, the mutations must be what are called gain-of-function mutations. They must create a new form, hence the term gain-of-function. They must create new limbs, wings, feathers, eyes, ears, lungs, and on and on and on, to include everything we see in life. They must create new information, a new function, and a new form. From new information must be the result of mutations for evolution to be plausible. However, as our evolutionist friends already pointed out, the first problem with this is that most mutations occur in regions that have no genetic consequence. Therefore, the mutation rate that could have an impact on evolution drops lower than what is already too low. But it doesn't end there. For mutations to be passed along to the next generation, they must occur in the germline DNA, in the sperm and the eggs. Only germline mutations in the sperm and the eggs are passed on to the next generation. Somatic mutations, which occur in all the other cell types found in our bodies, are not passed on to the next generation. Therefore, the mutation rate that could have an impact on evolution drops yet another order of magnitude lower than what's already too low. And then you must understand that the overwhelming majority of mutations are deleterious, not gain of function. Mutations almost never create gain of functions. They cause damage and they destroy functions. Again, let's turn to what's being taught as science today. The Introduction to Human Genetics course, taught at the University College London, also teaches about mutations, as do all secular science courses around the world, and I quote, "It is possible to imagine that by mutation a gene might gain a new activity. Perhaps an enzyme active site might be altered so that it develops a specificity for a new substrate. That this must be so is self-evident. How else could evolution occur? Examples in human genetics of genes with two such different alleles are rare, and the only example which I can think of is the A and B alleles of the ABO blood group gene." But then the course goes on to boldly say, and I quote, "There are many examples from human evolution, however. However, the evidence cited is that of a family of enzymes that have different substrate specificities, supposedly due to the duplication of genes from evolution." But let's back up a minute here. You can only come up with one example of how a mutation might create a new gene, the blood group genes, and yet you say it's self-evident. Then you say evolution gives us the evidence we need from gene families with different enzyme specificities. Are they serious? Folks, this is laughable. Every single human gene, as well as the genes of every other higher form of life, as they call them, and all the plants, all the new forms seen in every species on the planet, etc., must be accounted for by evolution for it to be true, and for life to have evolved from lower forms of life. You must be able to not only cite different enzyme specificities, you must also be able to cite how mutations accounted for all our genetic information and all the genetic information in the plant and animal kingdoms. So only citing different enzyme specificities is an absolute joke. Just think about that for a minute. With every bit of genetic information needed to be accounted for, they cite enzyme specificities, and only 2 of them at that. Do you see how ridiculous their evidence is? And as I said, it's a joke. It's laughable. LOL and all that stuff, right? Therefore, the mutation rate that could have an impact on evolution drops even 1 order of magnitude lower than it was before, which was already too low. And moving along, I must also point out that mutations are random. They're not targeted or directed in any way. Now, some hotspots of mutations do occur, but these are again the deleterious ones detected in diseases. It's not as if mutations continuously pile up where they're needed for evolution. So the mutations occurring where needed to enact the gross changes that would create new forms will happen even less frequently. Therefore, the mutation rate that could have an impact on evolution drops yet another order of magnitude lower than what was already too low. And mutation rates are also impacted by the size of the genome. If a mutation is generated every X number of DNA bases and generations, then the fewer bases in your genome, the longer it takes to accumulate mutations. The smaller the genome size, the more generations required to generate mutations that have a genetic consequence. Considering the mantra of evolution, that we evolved from lower, simpler life forms, it stands to reason that they believe that these earlier forms of life would also have had simpler genomes. Basically, smaller genomes reduce the mutation rate even lower. Therefore, the mutation rate in earlier life forms would have been even lower than what's already too low. And furthermore, there must be lots of mutations for evolution to happen. So many that they can account for all the newly acquired genetic information that exists between every species of plant and animal on our planet. This means there must be billions and trillions and quadrillions and quintillions maybe even, all creating new and functioning information and new and functioning forms. And moreover, due to irreducible complexity, billions and trillions of mutations, all being gain-of-function mutations, must be occurring simultaneously. So do you see the obvious and enormous problem here? This is simply not possible with the mutation rates that are observed, much less all the reasons I just reviewed as to why the actual mutation rate that could impact evolution is many orders of magnitude lower than the observed mutation rates. If we try to put a number on the amount of decrease in the magnitude of the mutation rates required for evolution, by utilizing the points I just reviewed and a couple that I didn't include, I'd arrive on an estimated reduction at the mutation rate that could possibly impact evolution to be somewhere in the ballpark of 10 to the minus 21st. And that's a reduction amount. So reducing the observed mutation rate of 10 to the minus 8th, which we know is already too low to account for evolution, by something on the order of 10 to the minus 21st, we arrive at a mutation rate that could impact evolution to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 to the minus 29th. And again, realizing that the evolutionists admit that the observed rate of 10 to the minus 8th is already too low, you can see the insurmountable problem with evolution. However, the evolutionists remain undaunted. They continue to propagate their fairy tale. The brainwashing and outright lying is what's happening in science classes at every level of education all over our world. It begins as early as first grade and it never stops, even though they know it's simply not possible. And I think I'm going to end this video here, but come on back for the next one because I have a lot more to say about how the evolutionists deceive us by making it look like naturally occurring genetic variation acts like a mutation. And if you like what you hear, give me a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. Thank you very much for watching, and as always, we'll leave the light on for you.